Culture. I 100% say culture. It's a culture of empowerment is what we see, like entrepreneurial culture. It doesn't matter how big, how small the company, how old. It's typically a culture of thinking, if I do this, I'm going to be rewarded for it.
Hey folks, welcome back to Agents of Scale. This is a show where leaders across the tech space come to talk about how folks are operationalizing AI inside companies. I'm Wade Foster, co-founder CEO of Zapier, and today I'm joined by Amjad Masad, the co-founder and CEO of Replit. And if you haven't come across Replit, which I'm not sure how you couldn't have at this point in time, they are one of the leaders behind the vibe coding revolution. And they recently just launched V3 of their agent builder. So, Amjad, we're stoked to have you here, man.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So, compare and contrast. You learned to code years ago, back in Jordan as a kid, borrowing computers, like hacking on internet cafes. What's different for the kids these days compared to what you were having to do?
You know, what's interesting is that today is a little more similar to what my experience was than it is, compared to like 5 or 10 years ago. I think programming over time had become like a very professional, industrial type of discipline. And, because you could make a lot of money doing programming, and computer science schools popped up everywhere, and it became a very serious thing. But when I was starting out, and maybe when you were starting out as well, you could, and before that, I think it was even easier. You could boot up a Commodore 64, get a basic interpreter within 2 seconds of booting up your computer. I remember when I started doing web, we would open Notepad and type up some HTML and maybe copy some JavaScript snippets here and there and get something going. And I think that was the real power of programming. And that's how a lot of us got into it, by just stumbling into it. And you learn by doing. You learn by trying things and installing all sorts of software. Today is similar to that, in that you don't need to go to school. You can just open a site like Replit, type in a natural language prompt, and get a piece of software within like 5 minutes. And then you can decide how deep you want to go. Some people end up learning programming by watching what the agent does, and Replit has an IDE under the covers as well, so you can open that and you can start coding manually. So you could do that as well. And so it's a lot easier, and I think it is more true to the original vision of computing, where computers should fundamentally be programmable machines, as opposed to like buying a $2,000 computer or tablet, whatever. And for you to find out how to program a new consumer, PC, has been very difficult over the past, 10, 20 years. And I think now we're getting to a point where it's becoming fun and interesting again.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to this like creative unlock that this sort of new vibe code era has brought to bear, which was kind of there in the 90s. You sort of have like
Yes.
AOL and MySpace, and these things are, like, to your point, more hackable, more programmable. And, the kids those days were just able to like have fun with it, and unlock their creativity. And it feels like we're seeing that again, where it's just like a much more creative era versus a, maybe pure industrial era of software building.
I think that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And software, before it became this very lucrative career, was something that, anyone could learn. And you had, IT people programming, lawyers programming, consultants programming. And I think also we're coming back to that era again.
Yeah. What advice do you have for folks entering into this? Like, one of the things that I've observed is the new bottleneck is creativity. Folks sort of don't always come to the table knowing what they should build, what they could build, etc. And it feels like that's a real skill set that folks have to develop.
Yeah.
I'd be curious if you sort of observe the same, and like what advice you have for folks to maybe unlock that creativity.
Yeah, we have a new problem of sort of a blank page, right? Which is the prompt space. And you sort of like have to formulate an idea and you have to think clearly about the idea to communicate it to an AI. That's an age-old problem, but right now this is where the bottleneck, because previously setting up the development environment or going through the motions of figuring out how to program a computer was where most people would drop off. And now that part is kind of solved, where we're seeing people drop off. Literally, we talk to users that go through the onboarding of Replit and not really do anything with it. And we talk to them, and it was like, yeah, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to create. And you ask them, like, what problems do you have in your job or in your life that you want to solve? And they start talking about them. And I was like, okay, just put that into the prompt. Like, you don't have to complicate it. I was like, oh, is that simple? So there's an aspect of disbelief that you can talk to AI like you would talk to a human being. And so I think there's a bit of a learning curve there. And I think the next bottleneck becomes a little bit of grit. So one mistake I made when I started kind of talking about what we're building, maybe I made it sound a little too magical, like you put an idea and a software pops out. To some extent, that's true, especially when you're prototyping. But if you want to take it to production, you still have to struggle a little bit. You have to struggle with thinking about the architecture of your software, the UX of it. The agent might mess up sometimes, and you need to have a little bit of patience. Sometimes you might run into errors that are still a little hard to understand, and you have to use a lot of different tools and resources. You know, it's what Paul Graham calls being relentlessly resourceful. And I think that's the next bottleneck. After you've figured out how to describe your problems or your ideas, I think not being discouraged once you hit a roadblock is the next problem that people are dealing with right now.
Yeah, there's a long way to go between Hello World and building something like Netflix.
That's right.
But I do think the great thing about what you're building is Hello World used to be kind of hard. To your point, you had to build up all this underlying infrastructure just to get something to, show up on the public internet some way. And now, you sort of, the bottlenecks are like more achievable. Like the amount of grit you have to go from step to step feels smaller versus one giant stair step that you have to go up.
Yeah, I've been building developer tools all my career. When I was at Facebook, we worked on React.js and React Native. And one, which is a UI builder or an app builder, one metric we had was time till Hello World. And it's like, okay, from the time you decide to install React Native, how long does it take you to get Hello World on your phone? And if we got it down to 10, 20 minutes, that's like a huge win. And right now it's down to seconds.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm curious if you have, coming back to this, idea of helping folks be more generative, more creative, more whatever word you want to call it. I'm curious if you've come across somebody who maybe you felt like on initial instinct, you're like, they're never going to have any good ideas. Like they're just sort of stuck. And you've seen them do a complete 180 where they're now building lots of stuff on Replit. And what do you think enabled that person to sort of do that 180?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of examples from our customers at the enterprise where people come in not knowing what to do, and then they would join a hackathon. So when we go sell to customers, a lot of executives are sort of skeptical. It's like, okay, I have my engineers using the cursors of the world and what have you, but why do I need Replit for more people to vibe code? And would they even have ideas? And we're like, okay, just bring everyone together, whether it's been a person or a virtual event, and we're just going to go through and we're going to teach everyone how to think about it and do it. And there's at hackathons, there's an energy level that is infectious. So a lot of people initially struggle, but then they start looking around and, look at their, colleague's computer and see, I was like, oh, what are you building? Oh, I'm building this, sales automation tool. And it's like, oh, how did you think about that? I was like, oh, I had this problem and it felt like a piece of software could solve it. And then that gets them thinking, and usually they get going. So there's a very like social contagion aspect of it. And it's very good for our business because right now when we go to a company, we tend to expand very naturally because people get really jealous from each other. I was talking to someone in HR yesterday, and she was telling me like someone posted on LinkedIn that they're using Replit to solve this like HR problem, and she had like a similar HR problem that no software had solved it before, and that was like the initial spark, and now she kind of builds things every time that she feels like there's something solvable. So I think it's almost like the skill of once you're able to build your first app, you suddenly gain this new perspective. You look at the world through a problem solving angle, which is what software engineers do. Like software engineers, I think one of their primary skills is looking around at their work, their lives, and seeing automatable problems. And once you get that, I think it becomes a very addictive game.
Yeah. That idea of hackathons, that's something we see time and time again when we go into customers as well. There's this sort of creative energy where you come together, and even if you're stuck, you can see a peer who does a thing, and then you can start to generalize based on that, where you're like, oh, I have a problem that's maybe not quite that, but it sort of looks like it. Why don't I try it? And because, I don't think there's, in this AI era, it's not like there's been like reams of education and textbooks and sort of stuff to like go do this. There's so much to benefit from kind of like show and tell environments where people can just see from each other and, figure out their own ideas from that.
Yeah, when we started building our platform, we had always like this social angle to it, and we were inspired by GitHub. GitHub is a very technical product, but they did one thing very, very well, which is the idea of forking. We call remix on Replit just to make it less technical. But forking is the idea that someone creates a project, an open source project, and you can go in and you can hit fork, and that literally kind of creates a copy, like a fork of it, and you can change it and you can republish it. Actually, if you look at social media recently became like that. And so if you look at like TikTok and others, the idea of like reactions, the idea of stitching, the idea of all these different creative ways of remixing other people's work, I think applies to the world of software and programming. I don't know if Zapier has this concept of someone building something and being able to fork it or change it or
we have this share process where you can do it. Mm-hmm. And it acts as like a really good like starting spot for folks to be able to say, hey, I kind of want most of this, but then I kind of need to remix it for myself.
Yeah, I mean, we're thinking increasingly about how to kind of reduce that gap of like, the problem of the blank page, right? Mm-hmm. And like having templates and having things that other people built in the organization or in the world is a great way to kind of get people bootstrapping. Yeah.
You mentioned, as Replit is being deployed in enterprises, some of the skepticism from leaders around, hey, why do I need this? My developers are already shipping code just fine. I want to zoom out. Because at the same time, you also hear from these leaders, we want to be AI first. What right. CEO hasn't written the AI first memo yet?
That's right.
I'm curious what you see from the companies that are being most successful. The ones that actually feel like they're not just writing the memo, but they're actually being able to really deploy this. What is setting them apart from a tools perspective, a culture perspective,
culture,
whatever it is? Yeah.
I 100% say culture. It's a culture of empowerment is what we see, like entrepreneurial culture. It doesn't matter how big, how small the company, how old. One of our favorite customers is Zillow. Zillow's been around, 20 years now, if not more, probably more. But they have this culture of entrepreneurship there. Like you can just this meme in tech, you can just do things. I think they have that culture, and we've seen people get rapidly promoted because they're able to use Replit to automate big parts of their job or to drive business success. And invariably, when I try to kind of analyze these companies, it's nothing about the tools or some memo or some strategy. It's typically a culture of thinking, if I do this, I'm going to be rewarded for it. one interesting thing someone told me. His daughter is like an early career sort of knowledge worker. I forgot exactly what kind of work, but she works at some kind of corporation. And she says a lot of her peers hide the fact that they're using AI in order to do their jobs. And I was surprised, like, why would you do that? And it's like, they're not going to get rewarded for it. B, sometimes they actually get reprimanded for it. And C, sometimes they feel like, oh, they're going to get a mountain of work now that they've done this. They don't feel like there's a reward. They feel like there's potentially you're going to get punished for doing that. I don't know how widespread this problem is, but maybe this is why we're not seeing a huge impact of AI on productivity yet. It's not showing in the macro numbers yet because maybe people are hiding the fact that they're doing it. And if you have a culture like that, you're never going to be able to adopt any kind of tool that increase efficiency, let alone AI.
Yeah. How do you? I mean, this thing is just wild to me. Like that this sort of happens still to this day. Like it feels like it doesn't take much fiddling around with these tools to see how impactful they can be. If you were to like what advice would you give to this woman who's like early career in this spot where she's having to like hide her AI usage, or maybe she doesn't have to, but she sort of feels like she should for some reason?
I would say don't hide it and talk about it and become a champion of it. And if the organization doesn't change, then leave.
Leave.
Life is too short to kind of work at an organization that doesn't reward, agency and entrepreneurship. There's a lot of organizations that would love to have you do that there. If you feel like you're getting negative consequences of being very productive, then that's not the place to be.
Well, and I think that's that's like the best advice. Like I for folks who are, maybe trying to figure out like, well, should I get in on AI? Should I not? Etc. To me, I'm like, the opportunity is so huge. Like if you are in it, if you are creating the gains, if you are pushing these things forward, you're going to reap all the rewards. And even if it's not at the organization you're at today, trust me, there's a lot out there that would. And to be a company that doesn't embrace that, all the best people are going to move to other organizations, and that's going to make it really tough for you.
Some of my favorite interviews is when people come in to interview with Replit showing a tool they built. Actually, one of our investors, we created allocation for them in the last round because they came in having built something on Replit that is actually quite useful and interesting. And so actually, a good percentage of the investors in the last round did that. And candidates who come into interviews, having done that, just shows us that there's a lot more initiative. And I think as you're interviewing, you can sort of take the initiative and do that and see the reception. And if you feel like there isn't a lot of excitement about that, maybe that's a way to kind of filter out the job potentials.
So on the note of culture, I think, my sense is Replit, you all are probably building the product, building your go-to-market, building your every part of how your business works probably looks very different than how most companies operate. And it's because you're kind of building the future. What are the things that you all are doing that you think other companies will be doing a year from now, 5 years from now, that actually represent how a modern AI-first org will work?
Our product team is very different than the typical product team. So we have a sort of a new product team that is made of designers, engineers, and product managers. And every one of those is a designer, engineer, and product manager. So, we call them sometimes design engineers or PMs, but everyone is expected to ship some amount of code or be able to prototype. Product managers should be able to, instead of writing these very long PRDs, to actually have a piece of software included in it. We have a BizOps org that tends to be sort of like a jack of all trades types, and they do a lot of work on Replit. That typically also means that we have less of these ops type people. We're not dogmatic about it, but a lot of our salespeople do sales ops as well. They all write Replit apps and hook into the data and try to make their jobs easier and better and try to gain insights over their deals and their leads and all of that using Replit. So that starts to kind of bring down the silos a little bit. So the seams between roles starts to kind of like blur a little bit, which I think is has always been, I feel like, where the future is headed. When you look at open source projects, remote companies like yours and others who really embrace the idea of, we're going to hire really smart people, give them a ton of autonomy, not really kind of worry too much about how they work, where they work, how many hours they put in, all of that stuff. I think that just the fact that that worked, even pre-AI, shows you that kind of AI is going to be a huge accelerant of that.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the best people benefit enormously from being in companies like this, because they have access to tools that enable them to do jobs that might have been more difficult than like for just them to do alone. But now, to your point, they kind of blur. How wide do you think that blurring happens? Like, do you think that you're gonna have sort of like entire roles and functions sort of like kind of fold into this like mega role inside of companies, or do you like where is the room for like craft in a particular discipline and domain versus a generalized way of going about it?
I think the craft, the craft is like sort of like the domain knowledge that you built over time. So I think that just it's not just in organizations, but extends outside of organizations. The other day I talked about this idea of like how consultants are going to be supercharged. So previously consultants would bill by hour, but right now you can sort of like imbue the domain knowledge you built over time that's probably not represented in the ChatGPT training set. For example, an example of a lawyer that specializes in like, I don't know, social media IP disputes, like some like very niche thing. They can like put all their knowledge into an agent or a workflow or what have you, and be able to sell that independently of their hours. I don't think it's happening at scale yet, but we're starting to see some of that. Like Jason Lemkin from Sasser built this app called Sasser.ai that has all sorts of AI tools. I think a recent company called Hexfield used their tools. He built it with Replit in order to kind of like calculate their potential valuation and raise based on sort of the data and insights that came out of that. I met this sort of YouTuber / entrepreneur. His name is Alex Hormozy. He built this app called ACQ AI. And the idea behind it is to put all their knowledge, all their ideas, everything they've done in terms of mentoring companies and how to optimize their funnels and how to build businesses into this chat tool that kind of gives you all the information, helps you analyze your business idea. So I think it happens in the organization. It will start to happen in the organization as well, where people will start to scale the knowledge they built over time.
I definitely buy that, but it still feels like like I'm not a designer, and so like with a tool like Replit, I can go build a good enough product. But I bet if I go pair with the designer with better taste, they will still make a better version of that thing.
Yes.
And so with a tool like Replit, I can kind of be a good enough designer. So like, how far does that go? Like how do you have a sense for like how far people can really push the envelope on this stuff?
Look, I think design is difficult because design is taste, and taste changes, and it's really hard to train that into a machine. But with software engineering, I think we're going to get very far, especially back-end software engineering, or but UX is going to be also subject to the same problem of taste. I mean, look at Apple. They keep changing. Like they change how iOS works, and that changes how the industry works when they introduce like something like Apple Glass, and that change, like there's this feedback loop with users and all of that, and that suddenly becomes the expectation that you have to build translucent UI, and the old generation of models or the current generation models don't actually know that or appreciate that. So I think design is the more difficult one. But I think with software engineering, we can get really, really far.
Yeah.
You'll still have that problem of like very domain specific knowledge, like the engineer that is doing distributed systems for a billion users at Google has domain knowledge that is probably not very well represented in the AI.
Yes.
And I think that job is very secure. But I think a lot of the product engineering or like full stack engineering that's happening right now is not only very well represented, but like the big model labs are actually training on that and hiring people to annotate and give the LLMs sort of data on that. And so I think that part will get really far where a product manager might
Totally.
be able to get to production.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, like there's going to be this explosion of like micro software that exists, and today the experience of tapping into that domain knowledge is you got to talk to that lawyer or that real estate agent or that, accountant or whatever to get access to it. That user experience is kind of crappy because like you probably don't know that person. You probably don't have access to that person. And even if you could, you may not have the money to pay for them. And so if that person can encode their expertise into a piece of software that is reasonably well designed, even if it's not what the best designer would do, that's still way better than today's current experience.
I remember when SogCon built like Khan Academy, and when I looked at it, and like there was this whole world of like MOOC, massively online courses came online, and you're like, okay, if you're like a world class teacher in a certain subject, you'll be able to scale your teaching to millions of students across the world, and I think that really applies to every discipline.
How do you think, speaking of, you spent a fair amount of time teaching folks to in your career, both at Replit, you worked at Codecademy before. How do you think this does, like, how do you think education should change on to take account of this technology?
With my education endeavors, I was never interested in education for the sake of education. I was interested in people learning to code in order to be able to make software. And now I think the ability to be able to make software is no longer dependent on the ability to learn to code. So, and I think people can pick up whatever required of coding in order to get their job done on the job. So I think that really changes how I think about sort of specifically coding education. But if I were to zoom out and think about education in general, one thing, if you work in edtech, one truism is that edtech tends to be really hard because there's been tremendous amount of studies showing that there are very little kind of interventions that you can make to change outcomes for students, and this is called the Bloom's Two Sigma problem. So Bloom is an educational researcher, and he found that there's only one kind of intervention that actually creates two standard variation outcomes for students, and that's one-on-one tutoring. For a long time, we didn't have the resources to do one-on-one tutoring at scale, and with AI, we're able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, which feels incredibly impactful for futures of society when you can actually approximate a tutor for every kid.
Yeah.
One of the things I've heard you talk about too is that AI fluency matters a lot more than coding itself. So to your point, like this education around teaching you to code, that's not necessarily where the focal lens should be. Like if you are designing, whether it's a school curriculum or if you're just trying to teach somebody to build stuff from scratch, like where are the places you start? What does it mean to be AI fluent in your mind?
I think having a mental model for how LLMs work and behave is very important. For example, now that we're moving to a new regime of training, which is instead of next token prediction, it's reinforcement learning from feedback, not necessarily just human feedback, but also environmental feedback. The easiest way to think about it is robotics and how robotics kind of learn in the real world by doing things. But also automated software engineering is basically learning from writing code and seeing bugs and all of that. With RL, we have a new set of failure cases. We had hallucinations with when we were training on next token prediction. Still exists, a lot better today. But with RL, the new failure mode, for example, is reward hacking. Is, for example, like a lot of software engineering agents would want to get a task done, and for example, let's say there's a bunch of tests and those tests are failing. It really wants to get the task done, so sometimes it will go and change the unit tests in order to make it succeed without actually solving the problem. So there's a lot of that's like a class of failures that you should understand, you should know, so that when the LM tells you, oh, it's all good, all the tests are green, you should actually go check and double check, because sometimes it's done something to the test that's like a little corrupt. And so I think a lot of AI fluency is understanding the failure modes of these AIs. I don't know how I would design the curriculum exactly, but I would certainly like create ample space and time for projects and for people to really understand the psychology of these models.
How do you think that plays out, that challenge plays out inside of enterprise organizations today that are deploying this stuff, where you have the situation of like, hey, checks are green, and you've got somebody on the other hand that's never built software before, seeing those things? Like, how do you think about the engineering of the sort of safety element in this for an organization?
It's tough. I think that's like one of the toughest challenges coming up in the AI space. With Replit, we actually are building technology to be able to handle this. For example, we create this adversarial system between different models like Claude and GPT-5, and have GPT-5 verify the code of Claude, and it'll be like, no, you did this wrong, or you're being sneaky here, or whatever, and they go back and forth with each other. So there are some technology solutions to this. But in terms of actually quality control inside the corporation, I don't know what it would look like. But I think maybe perhaps there's a new job title here. There's a new way to kind of think about it and handle it, to try to create this concept of red teaming inside organizations. So right now, OpenAI or Anthropic or any of these AI lab companies, they have this program called red teaming. Before they launch a model, they bring in experts that actually try to test these models and test the safety of these models. And so I think probably companies will pop up to do red teaming or automated red teaming, but I think maybe perhaps some corporations, especially the larger ones, would have to have their own internal sort of red teaming team in the same way they have a security team. So maybe under CISO, there's a new department that is like about as red teaming specifically.
Yeah, it feels like there is, to your point, like a role title that's going to emerge from this that is much more like quality focused, when more of the organization is spinning up software, and those folks may not necessarily have the skill set to like verify it. You need that. It strikes me as a shift that like, you see this in like manufacturing, where the quality control team is like the team, like they are they are the ones that do that. Whereas in at least software up until now, like, people kind of have quality teams, but it's not necessarily where like the best of the best are. But it feels like there will be a shift towards that, because there's so much value that can get unlocked if you can empower so many more people to build and shift software to solve problems.
Yeah, there has to be. I mean, right now, a lot of organizations just are using Claude Code and Codex and things like that, and not many engineers are writing code anymore. And so I think again, when we think about it in terms of production pipeline, you can think about bottlenecks, and so bottleneck go from writing the code to like testing the code. And I think there's going to be a lot more emphasis on that. And perhaps it's also a place for entrepreneurs to go focus on and try to find solutions. There's this company called XBOW, XBOW, that does automated pen testing, and they built an agent that can like run for hours trying to like break into your software, and it's doing really well. And it was like the number one on HackerRank. HackerRank, not HackerRank, HackerOne. HackerOne is the marketplace for security vulnerabilities, and so I think there's like an entire industry. There's a lot of money to be made by just like building adversarial AI tools that are focused more on quality and security and safety.
Makes sense. Let's get a little more practical out. What types of software are best for vibe coding today? So like if folks want to build something or like, hey, you're going to have a good time building this type of application, what are the things that really, really work today on a platform like Replit?
Things that indisputably work really, really well is these like point solutions or line of business apps or replacement of certain like SaaS software that's not working very well for you. And so, I want a piece of software that makes it very easy to generate purchase orders for customers on the sales team. You can make this in like 20, 30, 40 minutes, and you can deploy it and you don't have to change it or edit it ever again. It'll just do the right thing. So a lot of internal tool software is working really, really well. And it tends to work better than the like laceration of low-code tools and things like that. And then there's like these micro entrepreneurship, like solopreneurs that are spinning up a lot of these micro-saas companies. Those are working really well. We're seeing people go to like millions of dollars of ARR in a matter of months by just like building an app that solves a problem they're very, very familiar with. And you can build something, scale it, and get customers certainly entirely with vibe coding without any coding experience. I think where it struggles a little bit when you try to drop it into an existing really large code base, legacy code base, and it needs to understand that code base. It needs to use more legacy software. LLMs really want to write like the most recent generation of React. And oftentimes when you have a stack that is like more dependent on old versions of software, a lot of these LLMs, not just Replits, but a lot of them out there will start to struggle.
Yeah. Where do you think in the, like, what is like not quite possible today that you think a year from now, it's like, it's going to be much easier to build these types of applications on Replit? Is it going to be the legacy things, or is there something in between that actually is,
I think there's
more
something
in your line
new.
of sight?
I think there's something new possible, which is, we have this entire company building Replit agents itself. So to build agents, really good software agents, you need, perhaps hundreds of people. Right now, Replit is an order of 100 people. But I think for us to continue to push the state of the art and make it better and better, the company needs to grow considerably. And so building agents is really hard. But once we figure out how to build agents, we can make that into a platform. And so other people can build agents, not necessarily software development agents, but you can imagine IT agents. You can imagine, I think it starts with a lot of more still technical things, SRE agents and so on. But you can imagine it also getting into business agents, like, business processes. And you can, I think over the next year or so, you can start to imagine employee-like agents, like agents that are actually make it so that you don't have to grow your company a lot more, and you can like treat them as employees. They're sitting in your Slack, you're talking to them, they have long-term memory and all of that. And so the ability to build agents, I think, will be possible over the next year.
Yeah. Do you have like a particular type of agent that you're like, I can't wait till I can build this one?
There's so many.
I know.
I mean, there's like so many companies trying to build SDR agents, and none of them are working really well. So I think that's like a good test. There are quite a few companies that are already successful selling those, but they're not a full SDR replacement. And so I think a lot of the sales processes, like just thinking about specific kind of SDR type of work, like doing qualifying leads, let's say product qualified leads, going into the data, analyzing data, finding those customers, sending them emails, scheduling calls, and then passing it to the account executive. I think that feels like within line of sight.
Yeah. Why do you think none of those are working quite well enough? Like, it sort of was the intuitive place where it was like, everyone wants to do the SDR thing. There's so many companies and products, but to your point, none of them are. Yeah, it just doesn't quite land, right? Like, it was a recipient of like an SDR outreach a lot. No one's nailing it.
Yeah. I think context was a real problem. Like, it ends up being very spammy in terms of outreach, because they're not really they don't really understand much about Wade or how Zapier works or what are the needs there, and a human would still need that. But now that we have things like deep research, deep reasoning, LLMs, and the ability to engineer contacts and be able to find the right contacts in order to craft the best outreach message, I think that's recently became within reach. And then complex workflows, like tool calling. We've had tool calling since GPT 3.5, but it never worked really well. It always confused the different types of tools. It would run for like a couple of minutes and then just like totally go off the rails. I think software engineering agents and the labs optimizing for SWE benchmark, SWE bench, it made it so that they get a lot better at tool calling. So, what's interesting is that software agents themselves pushed the larger agent infrastructure to get a lot better. So I think a lot of it is about LLMs getting much better at agentic work, auxiliary services such as deep research tools, whether it's Perplexity, Exa, all these new ones coming in parallel. And then finally, like tracing and quality control. There's so many with like brain trust and LangChain and all these things. So an entire ecosystem of tools and infrastructure had to kind of be sprung up, come online in order for this to work.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think the other challenge that I think these things struggle with is that the most important thing for an SDR is not necessarily personalization. Everyone's like focused on the personalization point of it. But relevance is like way more valuable. And like marketers have kind of known that for a long time, where it's like, I don't need to know everything about Amjad. If I just can put a thing that he cares about in front of him, I don't need to cite what school you went to and your childhood and all these other things. I can just put the thing that you care in front of you. And I feel like that's like, that relevance bit is like kind of tricky for LLMs. LLMs are really good at like knowing everything about me, but they may not necessarily like be able to anticipate what to put in front of me. I don't know.
So you don't think it's a context problem? You don't think it's a
well?
I
think it is probably a context problem, but I think there's something about how we're empowering the person who is using these agents to do it correctly. I mean, you think about like obviously the major ad platforms crush this. Like how often do you like scroll through these things and get really good advertising? Where like okay, like they actually did that right, but certainly like
and they don't use LLMs.
Tools, yeah.
They don't use LLMs. They use recommendation algorithms. So yeah, maybe that's a very interesting insight. Yeah, I haven't thought about that.
So there's something, regardless, there's something missing in this space that nobody's quite cracked yet. Yeah. I'd be curious, maybe last topic I'm curious to spend some time on. What do we think the future of the software engineer looks like? It's clear to me that we're going to have so many more people doing software engineering. Does this mean we have more software engineers? Or does this mean we actually have less software engineers, but just more people building software and they're doing software engineering plus something else? Like, do you have a sense for where this is going?
I think one true thing that a lot of people talked about but wasn't really appreciated is that there's an insatiable appetite for software.
100%.
Like, and you know this, you built your company on this. But it wasn't entirely clear that, we're going to, everyone thought, it's going to saturate at some point. But, the industry, even with corrections and whatnot, we continue to hire software engineers. Outside of Silicon Valley, that there's even poverty of software engineers. Like there are a lot of SMBs that would want software engineers, but they're actually too expensive for them. And that's where we're seeing a lot of also adoption of Replit, because they can hire Replit for 100th, if not 1,000th of a cost of an engineer. So that's one. There's need for a lot more software. Does that translate into a lot more engineers? I'm not entirely sure. I'm a little agnostic on this question. What I am very sure about is software engineers are going to continue to get a lot more productive. And the act of software engineering becomes management, becomes orchestration, becomes direction. Like, you're not as much in the code. You're more thinking about the architecture of the problem. You're more, being able to manage multiple agents at the same time, being able to efficiently bring in the right context switch between the different projects that you're working on. And so I think that's like where the bottleneck will become, is like how much you can scale yourself as a software engineer. And there's, I think, a limit to the human mind in terms of like how fast you can context switch. But, a lot of us that, might have been diagnosed with ADHD or something like that actually are naturally like more suitable for this world where our brain, it works in more like scattered way as opposed to like a more linear way. Because you can't be as linear anymore, because, you're going to create a plan for an agent, bring in the right contacts, the right tools and everything. But then you're going to set it off for an hour or 2 or 3 hours. What are you going to do in this time? You're going to set up another agent to go do another thing. And you do that. And then you start to kind of like go and like look at the various agents and see what they're doing and whether they're doing the right thing. And I think it's like a different skill, it's different temperament. The software engineering used to be very, very linear. And maybe that also means like a different type of person, but there's certainly like just a natural limit to how much like a certain person how much work can they take on. So the limit becomes less of the hours of the day or how fast you can type. And it's more like how many problems can you think about to solve and context switch between them.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, I think about it, the scale of just Zapier or Replit or something like that, and it's like, even if I wanted this to be a one-person company, I can't think of all the problems that are in the business at any one point in time. And so there's just only so many agents I can sort of set off and control myself. At a certain point, I need other people to help me manage the fleet of agents. Now, maybe there will be an agent that gets good enough at predicting some of those things, and you can sort of have this like hierarchy of them. But we're not very close to that today, I don't feel like, at all.
No, I think we're very, very far away from that.
Yeah. I want to go back to one thing you said, which is this like insatiable appetite for software. I do think this is one thing that is like still very underappreciated. And I, if for any of us that have worked in this space, like we have seen just a laundry list of feature requests that a company like this gets. And you just know you're not even going to get to a fraction of them. Like there's just no possible way. And behind every one of those feature requests is a human who is like, I want the software to work differently. Like, if it worked differently, it would be better for me. And they're accurate in that demand, and they're accurate in that request. But there's no way that I can sort of satisfy every last inch or mile of those things. And so this is where I think, I just give final sort of like hats off to you. I think you built a software that allows people to tap into that like last mile of perfectionism where they're like, I can't quite buy software off the shelf that does this. And so I have to settle. I have to settle for something that's like almost as good as I would want it to be. But with Replit, you can be like, I don't want it to be almost as good. Yeah. I can get something that's like more what I just personally like. I like it this way.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where you just built something incredible. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And it's an age-old problem. I'm sure like me, you sort of studied the history of what people called end-user programming. So when the software industry became an industry where there's a lot of money, a lot of people trying to buy software, and it was clear that you had a discipline called software engineering, and those people are creating the software, and there's a bottleneck on how much software they can make. There was an idea, which I think a lot of low-code, no-code came out of, which is end-user programming. So that was before the advent of the newer tools. And the idea there is like, okay, we're not going to be able to build software that fits every need. So we're going to build the building blocks, the Lego blocks, and we're going to put a scripting language on top of it and have the user be able to program the last mile. And, if you think about there's so many software systems that used to be like that. Even operating systems were kind of like intended to be more like that. But even VB scripts, like every Office tool shipped with a scripting tool. It was Visual Basic scripting. A lot of tools kind of shipped with like Python scripting or JavaScript scripting. And so all these scripting tools or like Google's app script, but none of them got a lot of usage or any really. And I think because the bottleneck was always the ability to make the code, but also they weren't structured in a more like the way standard software is structured, which is like why at Replit we really care about creating standards. And a lot of people tell us it's like, well, you're making it so that it's easy to move off of Replit. Like I can download, you create Python and JavaScript running Postgres for me. I can download it to go to AWS. And I was like, okay, that's fine. That means that we have to be really good at our jobs to make sure we retain you. But I think the other reason is because LLMs are trained on open source. And so LLMs like to write open source code. They don't know how to write proprietary software to hook into your proprietary APIs. And so, the precondition for LLMs exploding had to be GitHub and Git and the open source kind of movement. So we're at the right time, at the right place. The technology is there for the original vision of computing as this like end user programmable interfaces coming alive.
It's exciting. Last question for you. So say you have a chance to sit down with CEO of a, outside of the software industry. This is somebody who doesn't do tech as a part of their day-to-day job. And they're trying to figure out how to go all in on AI. What is the singular piece of advice you give them? What's the one thing that you're like, hey, if you go do this, you're going to have a better time?
My favorite customers that adopted Replit and did a great job at it tend to be the champions tend to be the leaders, the executives, the VPs, and so on. For example, Lloyd Frink, the co-founder of Zillow, is one of the Replit champions of the company. He doesn't just use Replit, he uses everything. He uses Claude Code and all the other tools. And I think he is the one driving a lot of the adoption of the company. And so I would say become a tinkerer, create enough time, which is super hard. I understand, as an executive, my days often split into 30-minute chunks at best. But create that time in your calendar to be playful, to play around with these tools and really enjoy them and understand them and figure out how to apply them in the organization. You can't really outsource it. A lot of companies are creating these AI innovation hubs inside the company. And sometimes it works, but often it fails. Because, you as a leader, you're the, not only you're running the company, but you're also kind of like the spiritual leader of the company. You're setting the tone and you're setting the example. And so it's important for you to be the one that is out there, familiarizing yourself, inspiring people, showing up to the old hands and saying, look what I built. That's the best way to inspire people, in my opinion. And so I tend to fall back on more intangible ways in which people can inspire organizations. Because you can build up systems and teams and orgs, and that's what the tools available for executives. And I don't think they're as effective as you modeling the behavior you want to see in the organization.
Love it. Amjad, thanks for joining us. And thanks for what you're doing to help everybody build software. Folks should go check out Replit, and also go ahead and subscribe to Agents of Scale, folks. Thanks again, Amjad.
Thank you.